Telling the difference between a narcissist and an avoidant is incredibly difficult. Namely because of this. This is actually some research I scrounged up from the National Library of Medicine as it relates to narcissism and the attachment dimension. Now, the part that interests us particularly is right here. Hypothesis number 3, grandiose narcissism will be a stronger predictor of the avoidant attachment dimension. Grandiose narcissists are, of course, what you typically think of when you think of a narcissist. They are loud, they are brash, they are arrogant, and perhaps most importantly to us, they are avoidant. But here's the thing. According to the Cleveland Clinic, only between 0.5 to 5% of the population are true narcissists. So it's a pretty fair assumption to say that most grandiose narcissists have avoidant attachment disorder. Yet not all avoidants are narcissists. So how the heck are you supposed to tell the difference between the two? Well, you're going to do that by looking at 8 specific behaviors. These 8 specific behaviors. Now think of these like little behavioral tests that every narcissist will respond to differently than an avoidant. For example, test number 1 is their relationship with empathy. Okay, everyone seems to have a different take on the narcissist empathy debate. Some people believe that narcissists have a limited form of empathy, like this person in our latest narcissist-themed video. And then there are those who believe that narcissists have no empathy at all, like this comment on a Reddit thread, or this one, or this one. Personally, I'm of the belief that narcissists are capable of weaponizing empathy, but more on that in a moment. As it turns out, it is in this empathy versus non-empathy debate that our first test might yield some results. Narcissists typically will show a lack of empathy, or they're going to struggle to recognize it or respond to it unless it has to do with them. It has to serve their own interests. Then they can manufacture empathy. So basically, the only time that you'll ever see a narcissist use empathy is when it benefits themselves. This, of course, is backed up by many people smarter than me, like Seth Meyers here, who said, "It is accurate that narcissists have limited empathy, and that the narcissist is extremely selective in how and when they show the limited empathy that they have." Now, let's contrast that with how avoidants experience empathy or use it. While a narcissist will weaponize empathy, an avoidant is in many cases afraid of it. They feel it too potently. Their reaction to it? Well, they consciously or unconsciously distance themselves to protect their own emotional well-being. Let's move on to our next test. Test number 2, the view on independence. I'd like to start this one by talking about avoidance. If you've ever watched my YouTube channel before, you'll without a doubt have come across me saying these words. The core wound of a dismissive avoidant often revolves around this fear of losing independence. For an avoidant, independence is kind of a big deal. It's like their whole shtick. Now, this differs wildly from narcissists. Narcissists see others as extensions of themselves. They're useful only insofar as the person can contribute to their own needs. Now, this view of people or the world in general leads to a lot of controlling and manipulative behavior from narcissistic individuals. A narcissist wants you to depend on them. Because really, the narcissist has this constant supply battery that needs to get filled up. And that requires them to rely on you. Now compare that to the mentality of the avoidant, who highly values their independence. They tend to see emotional needs or dependencies as weaknesses, and there is the key. A narcissist doesn't want to be independent, they want to be in control, and an avoidant wants to be independent. Let's move on to test number 3, the need for contact. Last year, I got really fascinated by this question of whether or not a narcissist was likely to reach out to one of their exes. And it led me to writing this article. Now, after spending a few days researching the topic, I came up with this thought. A narcissist is very likely to stay in touch with their ex because they place that person on a type of supply Rolodex. When their supply of validation runs out is when you're most likely to hear from them. I think this is really important to understand because this behavior from a narcissist differs completely than what I have actually observed in the field with regards to dismissive avoidance. It's no secret that many of our clients believe that their exes tend to have dismissive avoidant tendencies. A few years ago, I ran a poll. Wait a second. Let me just show you.
As you can see here, 64% of people said that their exes did not reach out to them during the no contact rule.
Okay, so the normal behavior that a dismissive avoidant goes through when they go through a breakup is to ignore you, especially during a no contact period. And this aligns with what we know about their insatiable need for independence. So the big test here is that narcissists will often be the ones reaching out to you, and avoidants will often not be the ones to reach out to you. And then there's test number 4, the method of control. It's funny, after researching for this particular video for the better part of this week, I really do understand why so many people are convinced that all avoidants are narcissists or vice versa. There are so many similarities. Yet if you look close enough, you will see there are subtle differences. Both narcissists and avoidants want control, yet both employ different methods to get it. The narcissist, who is driven by an insatiable thirst for superiority and admiration, seeks to orchestrate the world around them. Often you'll see them manipulating scenarios and individuals as if they were pieces on a chessboard, all to cast themselves in the light of grandiosity that they so desperately crave. This need for control, it's not about guiding outcomes for collective benefit, about maintaining a facade that masks their own deep-seated insecurities. Now, let's compare that to the avoidant. You see, deep inside, an avoidant is haunted by the specter of rejection. They are engulfed in the fear of emotional pain and closeness. An avoidant seeks control by engineering a reality of safety by retreating into the shadows. Their control is exercised not over others, but over their own exposure to the world's unpredictability. So quick recap here. A narcissist will seek to control the person. An avoidant will seek to control themselves by removing themselves from the situation. Test number 5, the way they handle criticism. Are you noticing a trend emerging here between narcissists and avoidants? Pretty much every single test thus far, when faced with different scenarios, the narcissists and avoidants are reacting kind of similarly. Fight and flight. Narcissists will fight. They'll grow angry. They'll do everything in their power to try to hoover you back in. Avoidants, on the other hand, will flight. They'll ignore, withdraw, even sever connections to protect themselves from perceived threats to their emotional well-being. And perhaps nowhere is this theme more evident in each of these parties' reactions to criticism. Narcissists are highly sensitive to it. You'll often find they'll react in anger or disdain when you criticize them. And I think this is because it threatens their idealized self-image. This means you can expect the following reactions from a narcissist: verbal attacks, deflection, denial and gaslighting, rage, passive-aggressive behavior, withdrawal of affection or attention, public humiliation, or as this lovely commenter put, they'll get flying monkeys on their side with smearing campaign gossiping. Now, avoidant individuals also struggle with criticism. However, they're a lot more likely to withdraw or become defensive rather than lash out at you. And this tendency to withdraw or become defensive allows avoidant individuals to create this protective emotional barrier. It basically minimizes their exposure to further criticism and safeguards their vulnerability. Then we have test number 6, emotional expression. There's a thought out there that there are 2 types of narcissists: vulnerable narcissists and grandiose narcissists. Now, in the past, I've talked about how dangerous it is to categorize human beings into these black and white categories. Rather, the more accurate way of viewing narcissism is looking at it on a spectrum as a whole. On one end, you have more grandiose traits, which is sort of what everyone associates with narcissists. And then on the other end, you have more vulnerable traits, which are kind of more covert traits by nature. Now, for this particular test, we are going to really only focus on the grandiose area because this is the big tell. Grandiose narcissists will express emotions dramatically and in an exaggerated manner to gain more attention or manipulate. My question is why? What are they hoping to achieve? Well, I think the obvious answer is that it helps them fill their supply battery by attracting attention. And think of the benefits from their perspective. They can manipulate others. By playing up their emotions, grandiose narcissists will elicit sympathy, help, or compliance from people, and ultimately they'll sway them to act in ways that serve the narcissist's interest. They can also maintain superiority and control. These exaggerated emotional performances often put others in this reactive mode, which allows the narcissist to steer interactions and outcomes. By keeping others off balance through emotional intensity, they assert their dominance and maintain control over their relationships and environments. And then you have the avoidant. The easiest differentiator here is the fact that avoidant personalities are more likely to suppress their emotions, meaning you're not really going to see a lot of outward affection from them. It's one of their, as attached, put it, deactivation strategies, or a behavior used to squelch intimacy or closeness. Test number 7 is their response to abandonment. You remember earlier when I said I became really obsessed with trying to understand how often narcissists would reach out to their exes? Well, that's going to actually prove to be pretty relevant for this test. Like I said, I was so obsessed I wrote an article about it. Now, my hypothesis is that a true narcissist would be very likely to reach out again if rejected. Not of a relationship. Remember, narcissists don't view relationships as relationships. They're afraid of losing their supply. This means that upon losing a supply, a narcissist is likely to react with a fit of rage or a search for an immediate replacement. And it's all right there in the narcissistic abuse cycle graphic. It's just that instead of them doing the discarding here, they're the ones being discarded, which of course they don't like, and that speeds up their hoovering stage. Of course, as I stated earlier, they could hoover to someone else, but I've actually found that more often than not, they usually end up coming back to you, Old Faithful. Now let's compare the narcissistic abuse cycle to a graphic of my own making, the avoidant death wheel. So upon abandonment here, which is often initiated by the avoidant, an avoidant will actually not do much to try to hoover. In fact, as you can see here, they'll party. They'll enjoy the fact that they've regained their independence. Because in the end, the avoidant has gotten one thing they cherish more than anything. They've gotten their independence back. And then we have test number 8, interpersonal dynamics. How do I best explain this? Let's start with an avoidant again. Thus far, I've made it seem like avoidants only care about one thing, their own independence, which seems rather selfish, but there's actually a lot more to them than I'm letting on. Now consider for a moment that in each avoidant individual, there's a war raging on. One side of them wants desperately to have a deep connection with vulnerability and intimacy, yet there's another side of them that's just too afraid to let anyone close, which often causes them to build up these walls, even with people they deeply care for. But it's all right there in the avoidant death wheel. Look at stage 1. They want someone to love them. That yearning is there. It's always present. Yes, they've got these unfortunate coping mechanisms. But let's dig in there for a moment. An avoidance attachment style is shaped in childhood, and we can infer from that information that an avoidance caregivers probably were emotionally unstable, inconsistently responsive to their needs, or likely to encourage self-reliance to an extreme degree. Now imagine that you're an avoidant. Since childhood, you've been taught one simple fact of life: people are inconsistent, and that letting anyone in is a sign of great weakness. Every day of your life, day in and day out, that's what you're practicing. You're building that wall up. By adulthood, you've built up some pretty thick skin, but underneath it all, well, there's a human being. Someone who wants to be emotionally open, who wants consistency, reassurance, who wants to be vulnerable. Despite themselves, despite having this wall built up around them, they start seeking out a person who can give them those things. Now let's compare that with a narcissist. Where the avoidant is too scared or too hurt to let someone in, narcissist relationships are often superficial. And I so lovingly quoted one of my favorite TV shows of all time, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, to best describe how narcissists look at relationships. They're like Happy Meals with legs. All people are to true narcissists are sources of supply. a means to an end. In essence, while avoidants shy away from intimacy due to a fear of pain and rejection, narcissists engage with others simply to satiate their deep-rooted desire for attention, validation, and superiority. I want to leave you with one last and hopefully profound thought. These 8 tests, I'm sure you can find exceptions to them. I'm sure you can find flaws, and I admit, when it comes to human beings, you can't distill something as complex as us down to 8 simple tests. My terminology, psychologist terminology, avoidant, narcissist, grandiose narcissist, covert narcissist, vulnerable narcissist, attachment theory, none of it really matters. All that matters is this and this. That's your gut if you can't see me. Your body has a built-in detector to tell you if something is off. Even the people who sit there and say, well, no, you can't trust your gut because of X, Y, and Z, I think those people aren't being entirely truthful. My gut has never led me astray. Here's the awful truth. A lot of people don't want to listen to their guts because they're confronted with hard truths. But if they're honest with themselves, if they actually listen to what their body is telling them, well, perhaps there's no greater test.